Welcome to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Hadoke, watch a story and comment along to it, all the time trying to guess what my special guest's favourite things about each episode might be.
Hi Toby, thanks for having me on to talk about why I like the Celestial Toymaker.
Well, this is going to be awkward, because as far as I recall, if I didn't write it down, I certainly felt it. When I assessed this episode for Running Through Corridors, a book I wrote with Rob Shearman, where we watched every episode in order and tried our best to accentuate the positive, I think I felt this to be the worst episode of Doctor Who from the 60s, if not of all time, the worst instalment of the show. And of course, 10 years on from that, I mean, even then I wasn't in the business of putting negative thoughts out there where I possibly can. If anything, 10 years have made me dig even further into the sea of saccharine that is my love for Doctor Who. Well, it's not. No, it's not, because there's plenty I enjoy about slagging off Doctor Who and, you know, having a go at the things about it that let me down or disappoint me. But that's not what I like to throw, you know, in my own private thoughts or with mates. But out there in the den of vipers, the sea of serpents, the never mind alliteration, bucket of vomit that is the internet. I feel more than ever it's important just to put positive stuff out there, particularly when it's about that show that we all know and love, because I think there's something so freeing about that first time you discover that you can be rude about Doctor Who. And I remember the first time I saw a copy of DWB, and it seemed, you know, to be enunciating or you know, having the reveling in the freedom to go, yeah, but this is what I don't like about the show, or this is why this episode disappointed me, and why can it be? And of course, it's then very easy to be, you know, hugely down on everything, and there is something to enjoy about that. It's part of our sense of humour, certainly part of the British sense of humour, I think, to be very disparaging even about the thing that you like so much. But and my game, comedy, is full of people who use sort of cynicism as a comedy tool, and again, it gets a lot of traction, particularly in this country. I know my American friends might, you know, sometimes, you know, sort of check in and go, "Are you okay?" when one has done something sort of deliberately downbeat or wry, and you go, "Oh no, it was a joke," and they, you know, a lot of that sensibility doesn't quite translate to a country that is all about, you know, and you know, honourably so, about, you know, going out there, being positive, they celebrate that. They don't celebrate pessimism or downbeatness. Now I know that's a massive generalisation, but it certainly seems to be, you know, a more common mindset within the UK than with the USA, that you know, to dwell on the negative, or indeed make humour from failure. And I like that. I'm very much a glass half empty sort of person. I like wryness, but cynicism has started to bore me, and because it's actually quite easy to do. You just take a thing that people like and go, "Isn't that rubbish?" Now, if you're talking about the everyday commute or the things that, you know, a civilized country in the 21st century should be able to do, and yet massively fails to do so, that impacts on our everyday lives to create minor annoyances here and there, cynicism is rather good, and is something rather cathartic about expressing that and sharing that in a room full of people, or in a pithy line out there in cyberspace. But when it comes to the shared love of Doctor Who, I mean, there's nothing, you know, there is something fun about it. I love talking to people about Andrew Boxer's delivery of the line, "Oh no, a policeman," in Arc of Infinity, which I think is terrible, but I love. And various other things where you go, "Oh God, what were they thinking?" or whatever. But actually, so much now when people do anything to do with Doctor Who, if it's a trailer for an animation, you know, or a clip from a documentary or a picture from a forthcoming episode, you don't have to look too far for somebody to be going, oh, why haven't they done this? Or I wish they'd done that, or that's wrong, or sometimes even about things they don't actually know how it's going to turn out. But also, I know, when I've done my end of the year obituaries, somebody go, well, I would have chosen that music. And you go, okay, so you don't like a song that's been chosen. That's really kind of not what this is about, but thanks. And there's and I know from even minor things like that, which aren't really important, that it just kind of ruins your day, irrespective of how many nice things other people might say. And I do feel that about any sort of endeavour. This any even bad Doctor Who is part of this this great canon of stuff that I love and that has been so important, and anything made by somebody, has endeavour, has craft. Now they may make some mistakes, they may make some catastrophic misjudgments, and also not be competent in certain places. But I think it behooves us to try and be positive, even though I know a few listeners have said, you can be more negative. We wouldn't be hard on you, and it can be quite funny if you are. And yes, I'm not going to lie. I will never lie, but I will attempt to enjoy an episode I have previously found utterly bobbins of a story that showed so much promise to me as a kid that in execution seemed to be somewhat wanting. And I don't think we've ever really, as fans, got a proper angle on, because the way Celestial Toymaker is often talked about is not actually what it is, which is a series of, sort of childish board games, essentially. And, the Toymaker, for all that he's this marvellous, really original villain, does spend most of the story talking to William Hartnell, who's on holiday, talking to a tape recording of William Hartnell. Ah, dear. But anyway, but it is also a story set in a strange netherworld that is a nightmarish abstraction of a child's toy box. And for that, it craves our indulgence. It also has something I would have chosen as one of my favourite things had guest Kieran Highman not done so. He's already chosen the cast, notably Carmen Silvera and Campbell Singer, doubling up once again this episode, as they have in the previous two, which I love. I love that idea of a sort of a rep ensemble coming in to play the different roles. That gives it a strange feeling as well, and gives you the enjoyment of watching actors showing their different skills and their different characterizations that they can bring. I love all of that. However, let us see what happens as we take our places, assume the positions, and quick step our way through the dancing floor, which I'm going to press play on in 3, 2, 1. So this is the last missing episode of Celestial Toymaker. In fact, I remember when Celestial Toymaker was one of those, in that column that said, missing episodes, or episodes existing. It was a none. No episodes existed of the Celestial Toymaker. So we've lost the Queen of Hearts and the King of Hearts, and the playing cards, which I would love to see in an animation. Animated as actual playing cards. I think this is a story that particularly lends itself to not doing a literal animation, and I totally understand the draw of the purists who say I want it to capture as closely the 60s way of doing things. Well, animation cannot capture closely the way we do things. It's animation. You don't get the facial expressions. The amount of cuts you would get in a 60s TV show wouldn't work quite so well with animation. And I think because we have the existing episode, so we kind of know what it looks like as well. And we've got all those photographs as a watching experience. Go wild, have playing cards, have different sort of drawing styles for the different characters. Create this kids book come alive. But anyway, I don't know who Sergeant Rugg and Mrs. Wiggs are. What are they from? Perhaps I should have looked that up. Because I certainly know, who the King and Queen of Hearts are, but Sergeant Rugg and Mrs. Wiggs here, played by Carmen. And I remember actually seeing, because there's a picture of them with the Toymaker in the 20th anniversary special, Radio Times 20th anniversary special, and Mrs. Wiggs of the Cabbage Patch. Mrs. Wiggs of the Cabbage Patch, in a novel by American author Alice Hagen Reith, a Southern family humorously coping with poverty. I don't think that's the same, is it? Oh no. Anyway, let's not do that thing that I don't like people doing, which is looking things up during podcasts. But I suddenly thought maybe that's something I should have done. Anyway, Sergeant Rugg and Mrs. Wiggs were in the Radio Times 20th anniversary special in a picture alongside the sort of episode guide that they did, which I think was written by Ian Levine. Some beautiful pictures here in this recon. And they were played by Campbell Singer and Carmen Silvera. And then later I saw a picture of the King or Queen of Hearts, and I was like, oh, that looks like Carmen Silvera as well, because she was, of course, very well known at this time for being Edith in Hello, Hello. So she was a sitcom lead, really, and so I was delighted to see her turn up in Doctor Who. So that's how I'd realised that those those characters, were played by were playing more than one character. I'm not sure if the Claire and Joey had been captioned with the actors, but maybe that had given it away. But anyway, I remember sort of piecing it together, and I was like that. I mean, again, this is striking me a lot during this 60th anniversary, that the journey of discovery one had to get insights into programs, sometimes just by a picture here, or cross-referencing a picture here with a cast list there, or an interview memory there, and there was something exciting about finding out something new about a story. With the Radio Times 20th anniversary special and Doctor Who celebration, I finally discovered what all the stories were. But there were some, that we only knew a paragraph about, whatever had been written by Ian Levine or J. Jeremy Bentham. Whereas today, of course, as I record this, it's all just gone up on iPlayer, the Whoniverse, at the touch of a button. So lucky kids to have all of that stuff. But was I luckier because something exciting could happen every week, or a new thing would come out? The anticipation would get me slavering to get my hands on it. Sometimes it would be disappointing. Sometimes it would be thrilling and a treasure trove. And so it means that I didn't properly enjoy or experience the Celestial Toymaker until apart from episode 4, which I'd got as a bootleg, but it is slightly different to the rest of the story, really, partially because it doesn't have these two in it. But this is so you've got Sergeant Rugg being Sergeant Rugg, and you've got Mrs. Wiggs. I mean, they are very, very good. I think Carmen Silvera is particularly, especially if you know her as Edith from Hello, Hello, and she's also very touching in a Dad's Army episode where she has a sort of unconsummated dalliance with Captain Mannering, and it's rather sweet and rather sad. If you haven't seen that episode of Dad's Army, I can thoroughly recommend it. This is what I'm doing to distract myself from this episode, is going, watch these other things that these people are in. Here's Michael Gough. He's in some films called Batman, don't you know? And of course, this is part of the Innes Lloyd experiment. Well, I mean, Rob Shearman in our book Running Through Corridors comes up with what I think is a slightly fanciful suggestion that Frederick Yeager in The Savages doing his William Hartnell impression is a test run to see if they could get away with having somebody else playing the Doctor. I think it's a story beat that they come up with, and Yeager has fun doing it, but it's part of the story. I don't think they would. You need to put something like that in because we're thinking of getting rid of our our leading man. Yes, of course, the Jack of Hearts is in. The Jack of Hearts. I think I mentioned the Kitchen Boy. It doesn't matter. I mentioned something last time that Peter Stevens is in this as the Kitchen Boy, and he's the Jack of Hearts in the previous episode. Oh, and I've got things to say about Peter Stevens and what everything says about him on Wikipedia as well. But maybe I'll save that to next week when he. No, I might do it now. Peter Stevens is asleep in the back as the kitchen boy. I've been researching him, and it says online that he might have directed a film in America. And there is an American movie database that I can't access that has an entry for this film. But everything else that it says about Peter Stevens online and that I've researched suggests that just because somebody called Peter Stevens directed a cowboy movie in the States in 1965, I think, it doesn't necessarily mean it's our Peter Stevens. And I think the internet is sometimes too keen to sort of go, oh, two people in the same industry, they must be the same person, which I find extraordinary. And yes, I know Equity has this rule where you can't have two actors with the same name, but that is not quite the same as this. And also, there are anomalies within that. But the idea that somebody directing a cowboy film, you have this with Greg Palmer as well, because there's a Greg Palmer in the States who's a cowboy actor who's also in Star Trek, and Greg Palmer is in the 10th Planet and the War Games, that they must be the same person, and they're not. But try and persuade some people of that, even though I know Greg Palmer, who's called Donald van der Marten, and you'll reach out because it's on IMDb. In fact, IMDb, as I record this, is I think at fault because the Radio Times has credited this new coloured Daleks, the writer, as being Terry Nation, David Whittaker, and Sidney Newman, because somebody has gone on IMDb and decided, because David Whittaker changed things because he was the script editor, and because Sidney Newman is the, in inverted commas, creator of Doctor Who, they should be credited as writers on all the entries for Doctor Who, in the same way that Douglas Camfield is crept in as a co-director of episode 4 of the first story, all of which is, meddlesome and inaccurate, and but it's somebody sort of showing off. I did a whole thing about this when I did the Firemaker commentary for Happy Times and Places, so let me not repeat myself, but this is the danger of it. You see, I say it shouldn't matter if it's on IMDb, but then it creeps into other things to the extent that copyright editors for the Radio Times, or even whoever's doing the press release for it at the BBC, have gone, oh, well, I better add them because it says that on IMDb. Do not trust IMDb. It is not a trustworthy source. It is updated externally by any old Tom, Dick or Harry. And they don't accept some things that sort of professional researchers put in and try and impress upon them, and they do put in other stuff. Anyway, Peter Stevens, unless this American movie database that I can't get hold of says, oh, and the director was a British actor who was brought over because of this, because he was a friend of the distributor or a friend of the producer or something, unless there's something that gives an angle that the director of this is a British actor called Peter Stevens, I would maintain it's a different Peter Stevens, especially as our Peter Stevens in the same year was also at Colchester Rep or Croydon Rep or something, and it doesn't quite tally. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I would say it requires further investigation before I would sign off on it on an official biog of Peter Stevens, which who knows, one day I might be asked to do. I shouldn't think so, but I'll probably do an unofficial one for a podcast at some point. So there's a bit of non-trivia, or trivia I doubt, that has distracted me from the fact that in this episode, I don't like broken crockery anyway. I find it wasteful. I think anything that gets broken purely for entertainment, it's like food waste. I don't like, but I understand that's me being. But I'm quite sentimental about inanimate objects as well. We're supposed to be having a clear out of our house, and there's things I probably haven't looked at for 30 years, but the idea of getting rid of them, it makes me feel sorry for them. So Stephen gets hit on the head by a stray plate. So you've got a lot of. I mean, this is sort of nonsense. I think I said in Running Through Corridors, the dramatic high point of this episode is where two characters that don't exist argue over a pie, and that kind of is the vibe of it, and it is quite sort of slapsticky and silly and childish, which would be all well and good if there were a darker side to the childishness, and I'm not sure there is often enough. It's tricky for me. I did watch this in preparation because I can't watch with subtitles because it's a recon that I'm watching, so I'm having to talk and watch and think of things to say at the same time. So I'm not going to be following the action as much as I would with a live action episode. But my feeling is, that again, this episode with Sergeant Rugg and Mrs. Wiggs has the slightly the better element of it is when they're sort of threatened by the Toymaker that with their existence and all of this sort of thing. But they're quite sweet characters here, and Dodo is very good. I like sort of Dodo sort of teaching them how to behave. She is a bit sort of schoolmarmish, but it means that they're essentially children. They're children in adults' bodies, and they're types, and they're deliberate types, and the actors are playing them as types very well. But that dilutes any sense of menace. And at the moment, this episode, I think, with its slightly sort of comical characters, doesn't have quite enough darkness, and the worst it gets for our characters is that Stephen gets slightly irritated, and irritation is not necessarily what you want to instill in your main characters, because then that's the feeling they will sort of pass on to the audience. Yeah, this is it. So she's threatening him. So the Toymaker's two pawns, as it were, instead of trying to outwit Stephen and Dodo, are sort of dicking about amongst themselves. And the pie crashes to the floor, and they find the key. So that's it for the Thimble. I mean, again, it's a and here and that's the picture. That's the picture. Sergeant Rugg and Mrs. Wiggs with the Toymaker in between. And I remember, but I think it's a wonderful image. He looks like a character from a picture book. And I do love Doctor Who when it has sort of childhood things writ large. And there is, this kitchen set is marvelous. It's all like stuff out of a picture book, and I love that imagery, and the fact that you have this sort of necromancer from the stars manipulating these toys. I think is rather wonderful, and smashing that plate is quite horrible. But the build up to that has been a lot of sort of silliness, really. And you could say that the toys being childishness and leading Stephen and Dodo on a merry dance is part of it. But it's a tricky sell for me, even though I actually think the iconography, John Wood's design, and the way that the characters look, and certainly the way that the characters are played, the characterizations, if you like, as opposed to anything they do particularly, are all very effective. Now, these dolls, these dancing dolls, now this is very interesting because we don't know what they would have moved like. We know they're professional dancers. One of them, Beryl Braham, is the auntie of Benjamin Cook, who co-wrote The Writer's Tale with Russell T Davies. And so she has a link to Doctor Who. The other one, Delia Linden, has done interviews and events, and then a third one, Anne Harrison, has not. She's got a credit on IMDb for something about 1990, 89 or 94, which I suspect is not the same person. Again, Anne and Harrison could have got married. I think maybe a couple of other television credits only. Don't know anything about Anne Harrison, but one of the things that you find, and you must always ask, is you might say, I won't ask any of the cast if they remember this one person, because they probably won't. And then it's only at the end that they go, oh yes, and I saw Anne Harrison the other day. We're still in touch because we were at dance school together. So should Benjamin ever, as he's promised to, introduce me to Auntie Beryl, I will ask her about Anne Harrison, because who knows where Anne Harrison is. She's one of those that has not been interviewed about Doctor Who, and about whom we know nothing. The third of the dancing dolls, but we know a bit about Delia because she's done signings and interviews and things, and we certainly know about Auntie Beryl. But what we don't know about them is how they will have moved. They were all dancers, and the way that they stand, impassive here. This could have been a very effective moment with the dolls. They're impassive. They're a sort of parody of toys. They are played by human actresses, and yet they're acting like automatons, and they seem sort of facially impassive and inscrutable. So who knows if their movement might have been a bit creepy and strange, and there's something about using the medium of dance as a sort of something to control people and to compel people to move in a certain way. Now that, you see, is very much more like the sort of thing that the Celestial Toymaker should be doing. So perhaps the dancing floor part of the dancing floor was more effective than the hunt the thimble in the kitchen, which is maybe why, I mean it's not, but let me theorize anyway, maybe why they've called it the dancing floor rather than the broken pie or or the celestial kitchen or the waking recipe. Yeah, this and the music here, the the music. I think the music for Celestial Toymaker is excellent. The sort of glockenspiel, guiro-y, whatever it is, percussion-y, woodbox. It sounds like it's been taken out of a toy box or a music box from school. But here it takes on a slightly relentless beat that seems, listen to me trying to talk about music. I reminded myself then of the Cool Teacher in the Mary Whitehouse Experience, which was a sketch show with Punter Dennis and Baddiel Rob Newman, where the teacher would go, "Hey, what's this? It's got a good beat." But there is a beat, there is a rhythm to this, the sort of relentless, dogged rhythm of of the dance that seems a little bit like you're being commandeered, and the idea that Stephen and Dodo or Stephen when he's dancing is out of control and has to do it a certain way is I think a lovely Doctor Who idea. The idea that you could be and that picture of Sergeant Rugg and Mrs. Wiggs, which I've not seen a lot of these pictures from this I must have done the one time that I watched it, but of this of this reconstruction where they themselves have been caught on the dancing floor and that music plays like that I think is quite spooky and quite unsettling. And the idea that you can be trapped by the medium of dance, I think, is wonderfully Doctor Who-y, and that's exactly the sort of thing that this story should be doing. And that did communicate to me, albeit in a way that my imagination was having to do a lot of the work, because it's very difficult. It's unclear to see what happened and how that would have worked. It could have looked, clunky and awful, but actually it could also have been quite unnerving. Again, it's taking something that is familiar and certainly something that is sort of taken from childhood and making a virtue of the fact that, in those days toys were wooden and didn't have, complex expression on their faces because they were often pegs or, painted bits of wood or whatever, and turning that into, an overgrown, impassive version of that thing. And I think the dancers and the actresses seem to be staring straight ahead, and their arms are not fluid in their movement. They're rigid. And poor old Sergeant Rugg and Mrs. Wiggs getting shrunk and taken out of existence. And again, I know I've talked about this in previous episodes, the coda for those characters when they have failed and are, consigned back to the toy box or whatever is potentially unsettling and potentially moving. I'm not quite sure it is done enough. Again, I'm coming to some of these elements with a lot of goodwill because I'm trying to make this work. He's quite, the Toymaker has quite a temper on him, doesn't he? He's quite impatient with his minions and his creations, and perhaps that is part of his battle, is that in order to be who he is, he has to create his followers out of childish sources, children's books or toys, so they're never going to be as satisfying as your usual henchmen because of what they are made of. But that then does undermine the threat that they have, and therefore, by definition, sort of undermine him a little bit, because if your tools, if the knife you want to stab me with is made of pipe cleaners or fuzzy felt, it's not going to be that effective, is it? But I think Cyril really does work from the evidence of episode 4. The overgrown schoolboy who can snarl and be unpleasant is a great character, and Cyril, I'm sure, will be provide a lot of talk in episode 4. But there wasn't really that, despite the good work of Campbell Singer and Carmen Silvera, there wasn't really a dark undertone to the characters that they played particularly. And that's not their fault, as I say, because a lot of their interaction in the scripts is them, being slightly pesky, but then, being nice to each other and being told off by Dodo. So here's Cyril. So actually, Peter Stevens plays 2 parts within 1 episode. Oh my goodness. Do many people play 2 parts within an episode? Because there's a few actors in Keys of Marinus who play different parts across the story. That story has a sort of rep, an ensemble. But in terms of actors playing more than 1 part in an episode, well, Peter Stevens. I noticed, actually, I was slightly annoyed in the Tales from the TARDIS that has come up on iPlayer, the credits for the Mind Robber. They credit Bernard Horsfall as a stranger and Gulliver, and you go, well, no, it's the same person. It says a stranger in the his first appearance is to hide the fact that he's Gulliver, but you don't need. It seems to me like you've just read the credits and sort of stuck it, and it seems to be that because they've also spelt Sylvester Toozle's name wrong because they got it from the episode where her name is spelled wrong, and they've forgotten to credit Emery Jones at all as the Master. So look, why have I started talking about that? I don't know. Here we are, and here's the. But I love Tales from the TARDIS, by the way. But there was a credits mistake that I couldn't help but point out. See, this is what I'm talking about. Even in a thing where I'm trying to be positive, having lambasted the internet itself and Doctor Who fans on it 22 minutes ago during this commentary for the Celestial Toymaker Part 3, I've pointed out the shortcomings in the credits for Tales of the TARDIS for the Mind Robber, which has nothing to do with this, and which is otherwise a splendid endeavour that's made me cry with joy. But there's part of me that goes, but you need to say that thing about the credits out loud. I haven't gone online and said it. I haven't emailed anybody and said, but I've now just said it out loud because it will not allow itself to just fester within me. And that is why when I or anybody else puts something out, if somebody else has a negative thought, they want to put it because that stuff needs to come out. So, so people who do it aren't necessarily bad, and I like to think of myself as somebody that doesn't do it, but I'm just as bad as everybody else. So, but I also note there that choreography by Tati Lemko, who is, of course, Quitju in Marco Polo, Ibrahim in The Crusade, and Cyclops in The Mythmakers. So the fact that he's on his name is on the credits of yet another episode of Doctor Who, which doesn't exist, shows to me that Tati Lemko is the most unlucky contributor to Doctor Who in terms of survival rate, because none of the episodes that he is credited on, even the episode he's credited on that he isn't actually in, survive. But because he was a dancer as well, he's in Fiddler on the Roof, and did a lot of those sorts of things. But that suggests that the fact that he was a choreographer as well shows that some effort will have gone into the dance. So maybe that will have been quite impressive. Will it be my favorite? What is my favorite thing about episode 3? Well, yeah, I think I am going to have to speculate. And as I say, it's difficult to assess that, having talked through it, and I know I went off piste a few times. But I did watch it in preparation for this a couple of days ago, and I still did find it quite tricky, but I didn't find it as bad as I thought I was going to. As I say, I really struggled, and I think this when I did it for Running Through Corridors, but I think this recon is much better, or certainly much better quality than the one I watched 10 years ago. There's some beautiful photos. I love that picture of Sergeant Rugg and Mrs. Wiggs on the dancing floor. I hadn't seen so many of those, although that one of them and the Toymaker, in the kitchen is so familiar to me because it was one of the first photos from it I saw in that Radio Times 20th anniversary special. But to me, I think the fact that the dance could potentially be really, really spooky and effective. I mean, I'm perhaps also reaching to the idea that, there's some of these things, some of Doctor Who, that we have to imagine, and we can never, we will never, we definitely don't have an accurate idea of what it was, because we can't see it and we've got no telesnaps. But also, I do like the childhood toys writ large thing. I do like, not just childish toys from the 60s, which are wooden, which are painted, which are in themselves already slightly abstract. They weren't photorealistic like modern toys. So then when you blow them up, they look even more slightly strange and disconcerting. But they're also played by people, but dancers staring impassively. So I'm gonna go for the dance, because it might have been, but also the fact that I have to use my imagination in order to make that work, because we currently don't have it all, which is not a virtue, but it is making the best out of what we have, and the fact that there is interest to be had even from that which we cannot see. So it's sort of what this podcast is, I guess. It's even in our appreciation of this, it's making the best out of a situation that is bad. But even though it is a bad situation that we don't have episodes, it does bring with it, even out of that, unwanted situation, it does have offshoot aspects of it that can inspire us to use our imaginations in a way we otherwise wouldn't have to. So I'm going to go the spooky dancers, using the medium of dance as as a Doctor Who threat. I think is inspired and original, and the sort of thing that the Celestial Toymaker should definitely be doing, and perhaps doesn't do when it's got people arguing over a pie, playing Hunt the Thimble in a kitchen. I think Kieran is going for more general things, so I doubt. I might choose the music as my overall thing, maybe. But maybe he'll get there before me. Let's see, because the music I think is very good. I think the score is very interesting. Let us go for the dance and the medium of dance being used as a threat. What has Kieran gone for?
The third thing I like about the story is the way the production itself overcame so many setbacks, from having very little budget after the arc overspent, and the scripting process being probably one of the most tumultuous in all of Doctor Who, with 3 different writers, and having to rework all the antagonist characters after they couldn't use copyrighted characters, and even the back and forth about potentially getting rid of Bill Hartnell in the story. And I say overcome, I mean, it does result in the minimalist set and costume design that you see, and any script subtleties in this colonial orientalist analogue going on are pretty well lost, so there's no denying that the final product does feel a bit patched together in places, but I think for me that just sort of adds to the whole surreal feeling of it, and I just got to admire its resilience in a way.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think I'm going to get any of Kieran's things, because he's approaching this in perhaps a more overarching way, which is that is not incorrect to do. You do it however you want, and it certainly did overcome a lot of production problems. And I'd love for us to find some of those original versions of it to see exactly how it transformed and transmogrified from Brian Helles's initial conception. It's a story I think that has so much potential to go in so many different ways, and the rather literal way that it ended up, I think, is a missed opportunity. But nonetheless, as Kieran quite rightly points out, and this goes back to what I was saying at the beginning and the reason behind this podcast for being the way it is, even something compromised by, some misfortune and mistakes is nonetheless, and misjudgments even, is nonetheless, usually very creative people trying to make television on the fly with limited resources, sometimes with setbacks, sometimes with things beyond their control, and not very much time to get something on the screen, and also something unlike anything else being made on television, because this one goes through time and space, and has a slightly different remit, and often has to make use of everyday things, but use them in a way that is different, so it doesn't look like all the other shows on the television. And of course, the Celestial Toymaker, embodies that. It doesn't take us to alien vistas, but it shows us a giant doll's house or a picture book kitchen or playing cards, but anthropomorphized, and that is all really interesting stuff to be playing with. I would argue, especially in the 1960s, and especially in 1960s Doctor Who, which was, either spacey or historical. So even though I think this is a deeply flawed episode that in execution probably was, I've probably had to be very kind to it in assessing it today, probably wasn't all that great if the rest of what we know about Celestial Toymaker is anything to go by. But nonetheless, it has plenty to talk about. It would still be worth seeing. It would still hold surprises if it turned up. And it's still, not having it means that there is a unique, a number of unique things that we do not have. And that's the beauty about Doctor Who. It's not like, some episodes of, some long-running television series where, one episode could be pretty much like another. The fact that Doctor Who dares to be so different often, especially in the 1960s, means that every loss is quite a painful one. And the Celestial Toymaker, which is not my favourite story by any stretch of the imagination, and probably one of my least favourites. Actually, as I talk about it, though, now I feel bad saying that, because especially hearing, Kieran, advocating for the makers and saying, they were overcoming things as they were making this, and you go, yes, they absolutely bloody were. So I even feel bad, even though I'm qualifying it, saying it's one of my least favourite stories, because it's a part of Doctor Who, and it's not just a not very good part of Doctor Who. I think it is a not great story, but even within that, it's an interesting story. It's a fascinating approach. It adds different stuff to the canon, to the mythology that is now being resurrected as I record this character from this lost and not very good, according to me, story is being resurrected to become a palpable threat played by a major Hollywood star. And you go, no, well, hang on, So it's to be celebrated for that, and that's not me trying to make the best of it or trying to wriggle into making this part of the Happy Times and Places format. I genuinely think that is a remarkable thing, that this lost story can have so much about it that is unique and worth talking about and worth delving into and exploring and imagining and trying to get an angle on. That those pictures are so beautiful and the visuals that it creates are so beguiling, even if the story itself and what it sounds like is not hugely dramatic and the characters have to behave in slightly silly and annoying ways. Even so, it's still compelling and interesting and original and unique, perhaps more as a concept than what it actually was when it was transmitted back in 1966. But it is not what was transmitted in 1966 anymore. It is a shadow of that, a ghost of that, an audio-only echo of that, with some tantalizing pictures, but also a legacy and a place in the canon. And because of all of those things, that makes it much more interesting than the story itself on its own, just as a piece of entertainment broadcast one on BBC television might have been. But my other half is back, so I'm going to go now because I want my home to be a happy time and place, which it won't be if I keep talking to you rather than her. So, on the fly, guerrilla podcasting, but making the best of it, as they did when they made Doctor Who in 1966. This is what it's all about. Ta-ta. And as they say, keep dancing. Thank you so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest, Kieran Highman, who can be found on Instagram at HymanKieran. I'm grateful too to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Stephen Bitowski, Steve Phillips, Craig Wallace, Rick Moran, John Williams, Aaron Kolakowski, Matthew Harris, Graham, Julian Bashford, Angus Gulliver, Paul Jones, Man in a Skirt Alert, Jim Trenowden, John Molyneux, David Brodie, Michael Harvey, Steve Walker, Sarah Krotzer, Peter Burns, James Curray-Smith, Peter Harness, Ronald Hayden, Rob Leonard, Christopher Meredith, Gavin McLean, Richard Straw, Neil Tate, Nick Tedston, Tim Arding, Nigel Bromley, Peter Cook, Stephen Moffat, not that one, and Ruben Herfindahl. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. You can become a patron of these podcasts by going to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, where you will find advance releases, bonus material, monthly AMAs, and pictures of my dog. Tiers start from as little as £3 per month, and you can get a 10% discount for signing up for a year in one go. If you don't want to do that monthly commitment and aren't bothered about the bonuses, then you can go to ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke, where you can donate at any time and in any amount you wish, so long as you pretend it's a cup of coffee. What costs you nothing is to go to iTunes, Spotify, Patreon, and everywhere you can find on the internet that features these podcasts or podcast ratings, and give them a 5-star review to Toby Hadoke's Time Travels and a few lines of review, which really help to separate us from the crowd. Subscribe, like, and follow, and do all of that algorithm tweaking stuff. I'm on social media at Toby Hadoke on Twitter. These podcasts have at Hadoke Podcasts. Please find me on Instagram at toby.hadoke, and I have a Facebook fan page as well. Please do all of those social media things, and if you're interested in my stuff outside of Doctor Who, follow my comedy work as well. At XS Malarkey is my Manchester-based comedy club. That has its own Twitter feed. It also has a Facebook page as well, XS Malarkey, an X, an S, and then the word Malarkey. Well, if you're listening to this right to the end, you may hope for an answer to the puzzle of why am I whispering rather than enunciating like I normally do. And that's because Shirley is asleep beside me, but I want to get this out on the Friday for patrons who normally get a Friday release, and things have been a bit bitty so far this month, so I want to keep up with the pace I can, and having recorded the actual commentary, I wanted to get this out, but she's not been very well, so I've been looking after her. But so this really is guerrilla podcast making. But you know what? I kind of like that. I kind of like that I'm having to sort of squeeze this in beside everything else. It shows sort of how Doctor Who is so much part of my everyday life. It's moving away slightly from the very professional facade I want to do, with my recording booth and my proper equipment and credits and all of that sort of thing. It is essentially just a man in his house with a microphone, much as I like to pretend it's a proper radio show. Anyway, this will probably, this set of opening, closing credits and post-credit stuff, because it's slightly whispered, because I don't want to wake her up, might just be for patrons only. So here you are, patrons. This is a patron exclusive. It's like my normal stuff, but it's slightly more whispered. So I'm going to keep it short as well. I hope you've enjoyed the exclusivity of my dulcet but sotto voce tones.